a ball, so you'll look big ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to get started now. This is the Rob Kall Bottom Up Show, sponsored by opednews.com, available on iTunes and Stitcher and Pacifica Radio and Progressive Radio Network and lots of other places that I know about and some I don't. My guest for this show is Paul Craig Roberts. He's the assistant former secretary. Boy, let me get this again. My guest for this show is Paul Craig Roberts. He's a former assistant secretary of the Treasury and was associate editor and columnist for the Wall Street Journal, columnist for Business Week and the Scripps Howard News Service. He was a nationally syndicated columnist for Creator Syndicate in Los Angeles, and he's chairman of the Institute for Political Economy. His website is paulcraigroberts.org. Thanks so much for being back on the show, Paul. It's great to have you here.
Well, Rob, it's fun to talk to you again. Thank you.
Yeah. So I want to start ask, what do you think of Donald Trump?
Well, I think Donald Trump was on the right course about two issues, kind of like Reagan. Reagan was on the right course about two issues. One was curing the stagflation. The other was ending the Cold War. And Trump is kind of on the same course. He wants to bring the jobs back to America that were offshore at the expense of Americans, their careers, the tax bases of their states and localities, the tax base for the Social Security payroll tax. He wants to bring this back and rejuvenate the economy by bringing home the high productivity, high value added jobs. That's a good thing to do. The other thing, he wanted to normalize relations with Russia, which is obviously a good thing to do, considering that the two major nuclear powers have the highest level of tensions in my lifetime. As a part of the Cold War era and someone who is actively involved, I have never seen such a dangerous level of tensions. And so I think on those two grounds alone, Donald Trump is worthy of support. There's much else that he's doing I'm totally opposed to. I'm opposed to his environmental practices, which are degrading of what's left of the environment. I'm opposed to a lot of the things he's doing. But if we can reduce nuclear tensions and we can restore the opportunity society that the United States used to be before the offshoring corporations moved the best jobs to Asia, this would be a great benefit for the American people, all of them, regardless of their race, their gender, their ethnicity, their religion. It would simply be a thing. So in this sense, I'm for him. Now, I don't think he's going to be permitted to do either, because I think the organized private interests that benefit from the jobs offshoring and that benefit from the $1,000 billion annual budget of the military security complex are far more powerful than the president, and that he simply will not be permitted to achieve either of these goals.
You know, I've heard this before. It was said about Obama, too, that they're not going to let him do certain things. And I think that you're talking about the dark state, the deep state, right?
Some of it has to do with the deep state. For example, the normalization of relations with Russia. I mean, the deep state was very much opposed to Reagan ending the Cold War. I know that for a fact because Reagan appointed me to a secret presidential committee to review the CIA's findings that if Reagan's plan to challenge the Russians to an arms race in order to face them with breaking their economy, the CIA claimed, oh, we'll lose, they'll win because they have a centrally planned economy. They can put the whole economy into the military. You can't put more than 6%. The people won't stand for it. They were doing everything they could to block some agreement between Gorbachev and Reagan. I know that. I was on the committee that oversaw that and reported back to the president.
Who else was on the committee?
a whole array of Soviet experts at the time. I don't want to name them because I'm not supposed to talk about it. And the only reason I do talk about it is a long time ago, but I don't want to name them. But if you go back and look through the faculties of the Ivy League schools and look at the Russian experts, that's where the people were coming from for the most part. So the faculties at that time. So in that sense, yes, the covert operations part of the secret services, they're part of this. But it's not just the deep state, it's the public lobbies, the military security complex. This is a massive lobby. It's in every state. There's either defense plants there or there are military bases there. There's no congressman or senator that can run against the military-industrial complex. They simply would be defeated.
How?
What? How?
How would they be defeated?
Well, first of all, they would get no campaign contributions. It would all go to the opponent. And the opponent would be giving scripts describing the current hold of the office as soft on Russia, or in those days, soft on communism, and not looking after our security. And everybody would say, "Oh, we can't have that." It's what you're seeing right now with Russiagate against Trump. It's they're closing him down or trying to. And so that's the way.
Now you've written. I'm sorry, but you've written about how the reason that they're closing down Trump on Russia is because that gets rid of the $1 trillion gift to the military-industrial complex.
It endangers it. If you're going to, Rob, just think for a minute what the size of an annual budget of $1,000 billion, $1 trillion. That is larger than the GDP of all but about 12 countries in the world. It's about a third of the size.
16. Actually, I actually researched it yesterday. Yeah. It's 16 countries that have more than $1 trillion GDP.
Okay, 16. Well, what's the difference between that and a dozen?
Yeah, it's funny. I just looked it up yesterday, though.
Okay, well, see, I had looked it up a while ago, so inflation has helped them. But you make the same point for me, okay? Okay, see, suppose it's 20%, 25%. Still, it's a huge sum of money. Well, now, to justify that, when there are so many unmet needs, now I read your site, I read all the time about the unmet needs. The unmet social needs, health needs, everything. And yet we got $1,000 billion to spend on military. You've got to have an enemy. If you don't have an enemy, what is this money for? And so all this Russiagate stuff started during the campaign the minute Trump said he was going to normalize relations, because this threatens the most powerful lobby in the world.
You know what? I can't argue about that. I can't argue about the need to get rid of the expense of the military, and certainly the idea of having a better relationship with Russia is great. I do have a problem with trusting Trump, though. Trump, I think I saw today that he's made over 4,000 proven lies already. And the guy is clearly a pathological narcissist and probably a psychopath as well. So can we trust his intentions? Do you trust him?
Well, let me ask you this. What you just said could also be said about CNN, NPR, MSNBC, the New York Times, the Washington Post.
Wait, that they're narcissists and psychopaths?
They're psychopathic liars. What have they told the truth about?
Well,
everyone knew, for example, Saddam Hussein didn't have weapons of mass destruction. But what did the New York Times do? They led the campaign for an invasion of Iraq. Everyone knows that Assad didn't use chemical weapons. But what do the media do? Oh, he used chemical weapons. Everyone knows Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapons program.
Well,
Oh, but we got to bomb Iran.
well,
I mean,
but part of the reason they did that was because Dick Cheney had a war room that kind of corrupted the reporting of the CIA, and he tried to make that happen.
Well, Rob, I'm sure of that. I'm absolutely sure of Cheney's complicity in all this. But you have to know, I'm sure you're aware, that in the last year of the Clinton administration, 90% of what had been a somewhat diverse and somewhat independent U.S. media was concentrated in the hands of 6 mega corporations.
Yeah, yeah.
Some of which are defense industries.
And that happened because the laws were changed to allow consolidation of the media too, where before they were prevented from owning more than X number of television stations or radio stations within a specific metropolitan area.
And who do you think got those laws changed?
Tell us. Tell us.
The people who want the explanations controlled.
Right. Yeah. And there's no question about it. I mean, one of the reasons I started Op-Ed News was I was so disgusted with what was going on. I watched Colin Powell tell the UN that there were weapons of mass destruction. And I was so disgusted by that. And, you know, since then I've talked with Lawrence Wilkerson about it, and he said it's the biggest shame that they have to live with as in their career, basically. That they allow.
Colin Powell said the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. And they have acknowledged it. I don't know that the New York Times or the Washington Post or all these other mainstream media have. And you know, now, you know, just recently, Op-Ed News, it's harder to reach Op-Ed News. It takes longer. There's more lag because of net, the way they changed the rules on the net, the FCC, and that's making it harder for us to get our message out. And so we have to.
That's exactly right. That's happening to every site that has any semblance of truth on it. Even one like yours, which has such a wide range of opinion. I mean, you've got everybody there.
We try.
From one end to the other, they're all there, and yet you are also targeted because you've got a few people who say what they don't want anybody to hear. They being the people who control the explanation. You got to ask yourself too about the monopoly that exists with the internet. You know, you got Google. The social medium is monopolized.
Yes, yes. I've done some coverage of that. There's a handful of the 5 biggest platforms: Google and Amazon and Apple and Microsoft, Facebook, and who knows? Maybe this huge collapse of Facebook's stock value may be the beginning of a sign that people are starting to react and deal with it. There is an alternative, but
they need to develop the alternatives quick, or they're going to shut all of us down. That's the intention. Were you on the proper not list? You remember the proper?
Yes, yes. Op-Ed News was on the proper not list, and we've had George Eliason, who has been exposing that, and how, you know, I think the reason we were on it is we were very critical of the way the U.S. handled Ukraine, and Ukraine apparently was behind proper not.
Yeah, I think probably behind it was the CIA. I mean, the Ukraine is not independent of the CIA. This was an American coup that put that government in.
Right, and we were very critical of that, and the people involved in that.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, and you were truthful. You were right. And so, it's only the people who tell truth that they're coming down on.
Yeah, it used to be. I mean, we were one of the early websites that were included in Google News. Back in, I think, 2004, when Google News only had a small number of sites. And we were with them for about 12 years, and then they dropped us, which has hurt us a lot.
In the end, let's hope it hurts Google.
Amen.
But what they're going for is controlled explanations And they're trying to force websites to give up telling the truth in order to have revenues and advertising from Google and all of this. And it's corrupt. The process is corrupt. And so when you see the power that they can exercise in order to control explanations, you know that they are defending an agenda that they can't legitimize with the American people.
Absolutely. Well, you know, one of the things I interviewed Joseph Nye, who literally wrote the book on soft power and the future of power. And what he says is that the internet and smartphones and what have you have changed the balance of power in the world, so that no longer are nations the only ones that have access to power. And now you've got companies like Apple and Facebook that are going close to $1 trillion in value, and well, not so much Facebook anymore, maybe, but and they have incredible power, and I think that we have to stop it. I there was a query to journalists recently about Apple becoming worth $1 trillion, and that's why I was looking up about the gross national product, the GNP of countries yesterday. Because I've written a lot. I don't think that billionaires should be allowed to exist, which makes libertarians go crazy, but I think that they're too powerful. And I think that a company that is that big is also too powerful. I believe that the answer, and I call the show Bottom Up. I think that we need to be smaller. I think we need to be more local. And I think that the way to handle it is to make laws that if a company gets to a certain size, it can't acquire anymore. It can partner with other companies and make them stronger. That's a great thing. But companies that get too big, I think, are dangerous.
Yeah, I agree with you. It used to be that way. We had the Sherman Antitrust Act, but now it's no longer enforced, because what globalism has done is spread the notion that in order to compete, you have to be gigantic in size. And so they say, oh, if we enforce the Sherman Antitrust Act, we'll be too small to compete. And this is why we have banks that are too big to fail. I read the other day, and you check it, I wouldn't bet my life on it, but I read the other day that the 5 big American banks have 90% of the deposits.
90%.
90%. Yeah. And look, Rob, this is just like the media. 6 mega companies have 90%.
Yeah, we need to break all that stuff up. We got to take everything back. I was fascinated that you've written recently that Trump should be privatizing these big companies.
Yeah. Look what just happened. Now, Trump says he wants to bring the jobs back, and he's trying to do it with tariffs. That's not going to work. But at least he has the right idea. So here's Trump. He says, we got to bring the jobs back. And so what did Ford just declare? Ford Motor Company just declared that they're moving the entire production of the Ford Focus to China. In fact, Americans won't even be able to get one for a year until all the stuff is set up over there and they can be re-imported into the United States. So right in face of Trump's, one of his 2 big issues, get the jobs home, here's Ford saying the entire production of Focus is moved to China. So this shows the power of these companies. They can just spit in the president's face. They don't have to pay any attention to him.
Oh, it's not just the president.
Do that. You couldn't do that.
It's the American people's face. I mean, these companies were rescued by the American people.
That's right. That's right.
Here they go and they do this. Now, you're answering with this story because I asked you about the idea of privatizing big companies, and you have encouraged Trump to privatize Ford because he's done this.
Yeah, and I think a number of others.
Yes, Apple you listed.
Levi, Nike, all of them. It's the only way you can get the jobs back. Because you see, I pointed out that one way to reverse the job loss is to tax American corporations according to where they add value to their product. In other words, if they add value to their product in the United States with American labor, you give them a low tax rate. But if they add value to their product abroad with foreign labor, you give them a high tax rate.
I love it. It's brilliant.
And you can use that tax rate to offset the labor cost advantage of producing abroad.
So, but wouldn't that violate the terms of these transnational agreements?
I think not. I think it does not violate the WTO. Listen, we're not live, are we?
No, no.
Can we take a break? Let me let my cat in. She's making so much noise. Okay. Okay, good.
Okay, so we're back from the little break, and it's a good time for a station ID. This is the Rob Kall Bottom Up Show, sponsored by opednews.com, available on Pacifica Radio and Progressive Radio Network and Stitcher and iTunes and Google and lots more. My guest for this show is Paul Craig Roberts, the former Assistant Attorney Secretary of the... My guest for this show is Paul Craig Roberts, former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury and Chairman of the Institute for Political Economy. His website is paulcraigroberts.org. We're back. So we were talking about nationalizing big companies. You think that's at all viable?
It would be great for the economy.
Why?
Well, when I was coming along and you were coming along and we were young men, if you looked at a corporation, the executives felt loyalties and commitments to customers, to the workforce, to the local communities, and to the shareholders. But now, after all these decades of neoliberal economics, they have been brainwashed in all the business schools. And part of this came from Milton Friedman. They've been brainwashed that their only obligation is to shareholders.
Talk about neoliberal economics and how that ties in with this.
Well, neoliberal economics got rid of classical economics, because classical economics was opposed to economic rents, that is unearned incomes. It was opposed to the financialization of the economy. It was opposed to the use of government policy by business to create rents for themselves, that is, profits not based on production or competition. And this was inconvenient for the movers and shakers in the economic world, and so they started supporting economists like what was his name? Gone right out of my head.
You mentioned Milton Friedman.
Well, this was long before him. He was at the very tail end.
Hayek.
No, John Bates Clark. John Bates Clark. Well, he was a big, important economist at Harvard. There's a prize there in his name they give every year. Larry Summers won the prize when he was a young economist on the faculty there.
Larry Summers is the economist that Obama appointed.
And he's a neoliberal economist. And if you look at his term in the Treasury, I mean, who benefited? The American people or the big banks?
Yeah. Well, and it seemed like Obama was the Robert Rubin president, really. And I would assume that Robert Rubin is a neoliberal.
Robert Rubin, like all of them, are out for themselves and the banks that provide for them.
Yeah. When did it start? When did neoliberalism start?
It started, I think, with John Bates Clark, because he declared that all income was earned. There was no such thing as a monopoly rent. There was no such thing as being rewarded for something that you had nothing to do with the production of it.
And when did he say that?
I was around the early parts of the 20th century.
Really?
Like 1906, somewhere around there.
Wow.
You know, the expert on this is Michael Hudson.
Michael Hudson.
Yeah, Michael Hudson, he is, in my opinion, the best economist alive. You should have him on the show one day just to talk about how the neoliberal economists took over, how they serve the financial interests and monopoly interests, and that's all they do. They're not, in my view, I don't regard them as honest economists. Now, a lot of them don't know that because they just get brainwashed when they go to school, you know. And if you're in a profession and you dissent from it, you don't get anywhere. You have to go along with it. Just
yeah, I mean, from what I understand, the economic field is so rigid and restricted in what it can talk about and what it can publish on in professional journals that they're really kind of constipated so badly that they can't even think. All they can do is talk in a very, very, very narrow space.
That's a good way to sum it up, Rob. That's a very good way to sum it up. I agree with you.
And I think it's it's bipartisan, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, sure. It's nothing to do with conservatives and liberals. These interest groups now are independent of the old ideological way of thinking, conservatives and liberals. I'm not sure either even exist. Well, what you got are these massive interest groups. They have agendas that they can't market directly to the people. They have to disguise them. And then to protect that disguise, they have to control the explanations. So the economists are just one of the groups they use to control the explanations.
So tell me what's the economic model that you believe in, value, would like to see happening?
Well, I agree with Michael Hudson. We have to go back to the classical economists and proceed from there. Because,
Like who?
Who were they? Well, they were Karl Marx, Adam Smith, John Stuart Mill, Ricardo. These kinds of people, they had it on the right track. And I don't mean by Marx about exportation and all of that, or the way he's presented, but I mean the basic corpus of his work. There's a lot of just correct, sound stuff in there. And Adam Smith, Ricardo, these people, they wouldn't be taken in by the kinds of, these are thought of as the founders of free trade, but they wouldn't be taken in by the kind of free trade arguments we get now.
Okay, so let's continue. You listed a group of people whose economic models you believe in. What are parts of those models that make you feel that those people got it right?
Well, because they believe that you don't tax labor and production. You tax unearned rents. You tax what they call economic rent. For example, to give you an example, suppose, as happened while I was in Washington, they decide to put a subway in Washington. Okay, so they go out, they use taxpayer money, or they borrow and use taxpayer money to service the debt, and they build a subway. Now, what happens all along that subway line is all the property close to the subway goes up quickly in value. It goes way up in value. Now, the owners have done nothing whatsoever to produce that rise in value. It was produced by a public works program. And that public works program should have been financed by taxing away the rise in value that the public works program gave to the property owners, not by lumping debt on the heads of the general taxpayer. Now, that was their approach to taxation. You see what I mean?
It's interesting because Chomsky talks about having to account, and also Vandana Shiva talk about having to account for externalities. When Chomsky talks about it, he usually talks about the costs, but here you have externality profits that you're talking about, and I never thought about that before.
Yeah, well, this is the classical. That's the approach. Now, Michael Hudson is excellent on this. In fact, you could almost say he's one of the few economists that actually exists. So the rest of them are out there protecting these unearned rents.
So it's interesting because, I call the show Bottom Up. I got a book coming out, Bottom Up, Tapping the Power of the Connection Revolution, which thank you, you've blurbed. And basically what you're describing is taking a more bottom-up approach to paying for things out of the profits that evolve. I love that idea. Actually, it makes so much sense. And God, I can just imagine the powers that be fighting it, though.
Yeah. Well, it's not really profits because it's an unearned rent to the property owner. If the subway drives up his property values, he's done nothing to produce that rise in value. He just happened to be the owner of the property. So he's done nothing to produce that rise in value. The public works system did. And so you should finance the public works system by taxing away that value.
Now, another conversation that I heard originally at a socialism conference was talking about gentrification, about how artists will come into a depressed area, they'll get lofts in abandoned factories and warehouses, and the next thing you know, all the rents are going up, so people can't afford to live in the houses, and the taxes go up. Would that be similar for gentrification then?
I suppose it's producing a rise in values that the people who own the property have done nothing to produce.
Yeah.
So it's defined as an economic rent. Let me give you another example of an economic rent. If a road goes through property, the same thing happens. But here's an example. Take something like beachfront. So here's a lot on the beach, and here's one right behind it. Now, the beachfront lot's probably going to be 2-3 times the price because it's beachfront.
Right.
Well, what has the owner done to produce that rise in value? Nothing.
Well, I would think that with beachfront, it was there. They paid for that in the first place. I mean,
well, they may have, but let's suppose it's the Florida Panhandle, where it was called the Redneck Riviera, and nobody really went there, and you could get beachfront for next to nothing. And then the big real estate interests come in and decide to hype it and market it and develop it, and all of a sudden
benefits.
All of a sudden, something you paid $20,000 for is $2 million.
Right. Yeah.
What did you do? Nothing.
Now, it'd be interesting to see how to make that work in terms of using a tax model like that. I want to make sure that we cover the reason we arranged this conversation in the first place. Though you sent me an email about an article basically advocating for impeaching Trump and getting rid of him by engaging in massive protests. And you wrote to me and you said, Rob, this is idiocy. There is a full-scale open coup against the elected president of the U.S. And this idiot speaks of a president about to be overthrown as a dictator in cahoots with a foreign enemy. This is unbelievable mindlessness. I hope you don't mind me reading that.
No, that's exactly what I think. I've written it many times in columns, yeah.
Yeah, so talk about it.
Well, we really already have. I mean...
Well, okay, so I'll talk a little bit about it because I think I detest Trump. I think he is a pathological liar and a psychopath and a narcissist, and everything he does is based on whether it's good for him and his family or not, and his business. And I find it hard to believe that he has a single benevolent bone in his body, that he cares about anything or anybody unless it's good for him. And so when you say that you think that he's trying to do these two things, one, protect the American workers, and two, help for peace in Russia, I can't argue with you at all about that intention, but I don't trust him that he's really doing any of that. And
okay, so, before the train of thought gets lost, let me just say this: if in your view, he only does what serves his interests. Well, how is his interest served when it pulls down on his head the entirety of the military security complex, all the security agencies, including the FBI and the CIA, the entirety of the print and TV media, and now the big offshore corporations? Now, when all of that comes on your head, how is it serving your interest? And how is your interest served when you have the former CIA director, the former director of the FBI, demanding your removal from office, your impeachment because you're a traitor or you're Putin's agent? When you have the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, organizing the plot of Russiagate to discredit you with no evidence ever. How is this in his interest? Clearly, if Trump was only going to act in his interest, he would have gone along with the interest groups. The last thing he would have done would be to upset and challenge a powerful interest group like the military security complex.
Now Tom Hartman has written that Trump is doing what he's doing with Russia because they have financial control of him, or
some kind of
influence over him. Watch the language. You can't. I'm going to have to.
Okay, that's nonsense. That's nonsense. First of all, we don't know what he's doing in Russia. There's no evidence he's done anything with Russia.
No. Yeah, which can be a negative or a positive, I guess.
Well, but we that's the whole thing about it. This has gone on for years.
I need to just say one thing because I think that what is happening with the Hillary Clinton Democrats, where they've brought suit against Assange and where they're taking up this battle against Russia, I think they're doing it as an excuse for their loss, and I think as a cover for the incompetence and the failure that they experienced. And as I've said, I think the idea of making peace with Russia is a great thing. So I just want to really make that clear. And I think that I have long felt, I've had many whistleblowers on from NSA and CIA, and I've had on Ray McGovern, a former FBI guy, and others. So I really believe that we have a major problem with the U.S. intelligence agencies, and that they do not have the interests of the American people, the 99%, as their main goal. So, there's a lot I agree with you on. I just am still not convinced that, in spite of all you say, that that what Trump is doing is really going to help anybody. And like for example, his tariffs that he's doing, that doesn't seem to be helping.
As I said, at the beginning of our conversation today, Rob, I said this isn't going to work. It's the wrong approach, and the right approach, I told you, was that taxation method. But he doesn't know that. Who's there to tell him? There's nobody there to tell him.
The problem is
certainly Kudlow's not going to tell him. Mnuchin is not going to tell him. How is he going to find out?
Well, the problem is that he's such a pathological psychopath that he's like the scorpion that goes and takes the ride across the river on the back of the frog and kills the frog. Why did you kill us? Because it's my nature. He can't help himself.
Well, listen, Rob, I don't agree with this characterization of him, not because I'm his partisan or anything. The reason I don't agree is that a person like that would certainly not go against such powerful interest groups, and the only reason he's in any trouble, you see, Hillary and the Democrats they couldn't do anything if it weren't for the CIA and the FBI, if it weren't for Brennan and Comey who launched this. Nobody would be paying any attention to Hillary and the DNC or the media. The basis for this is Brennan's initial statements while he was still CIA director, and Comey's while he was still in the FBI. This is where it all came from, and this is why the Democrats can latch on to it.
No, but they also helped. I mean, Comey helped bury Hillary with his announcement a couple weeks before the election.
Well, but he took it all back. He did.
Too late.
I mean, he actually, this is what some people say. I don't believe that. I think it took it all back. And I don't think it had any effect, Rob, because you see, you're thinking like an intellectual. But the vast majority of the people who voted for Trump, what they're thinking about is they've been watching for 2 decades their jobs disappear, the tax base of their local and state governments disappear, their pensions under attack, the opportunities for their children disappearing. This is what they've been witnessing. And this is why they voted for him. It didn't have anything to do with Hillary and her emails, and it had nothing whatsoever.
I'm not going to argue with that at all. I mean, I couldn't vote for Hillary. I was unable to vote for Hillary. I didn't vote for Trump, but I didn't vote for Hillary. I just want to but finish my thought about the scorpion, Trump being like a scorpion. The thing is, he has done this stabbing people in the back to so many people who he hired, that who can he hire now? Who is going to take the risk of working for a guy who is such a malignant, torturous traitor, a person who has no loyalty to the people who he hires? That's why, and I said it because that's why he doesn't have any economists who can give him good advice, because anybody who's smart enough to give him good advice isn't going to work for him.
All right, well, let me answer that for you. It's a fair, good question. First of all, there aren't any economists. There's me, there's Michael Hudson. and he wouldn't be allowed to hire either one of us.
There's this public website, something like Evolutional Economists. They're a pretty good group. I like what they're doing.
Yeah, Herman Daly, ecological economists. Yeah, there's a few. I'm exaggerating when I say it's only me and Michael Hudson. But I probably couldn't name a dozen economists that I would regard as capable.
Yeah.
And I've been one all my life. I've been in the universities, at least a half a dozen, some of the finest universities. But to get on with your question, one of the reasons he's had to stab people in the back, like General Flynn, for example. And who was the other guy that, one's still in the news, the one that had the English internet site, Breitbart. No, the guy that he was his personal advisor in the White House, he had to get rid of.
Cohen? No.
You know who. I'm bad with names. But anyhow, the reason he has to do this is the ruling group put such pressure on him, he can't withstand it. He can't stand up to the pressure, so he has to throw something overboard. This happens to people in that fix. He has to self-preserve.
The words in character and integrity come up to me when I think about people that throw people under the bus.
Well, it's him or them. And if you're sitting there,
no question with Trump who it is when it's him or them, that's for sure.
But wait a minute, if you're the president and you have some hopes of doing something, and certainly you don't want, if the president gets thrown under the bus, then the whole system is weakened that much more.
I would say that this president has done more to weaken the system by his appointments, by the actions of his appointments in specific agencies, particularly the EPA. And you've already agreed with that.
I've already said that. Let's stay away from that. I agree with that. But you have to. But Rob, look, this also reflects his idea about jobs. Here's the question: is jobs or the environment? I told the people jobs. Do you see what I'm saying? That's the way it's drawn up. No pipelines, no jobs. No fracking,
but
no jobs.
that's a false
Rob,
dichotomy.
just a minute. I'm not justifying anything. I'm explaining to you
What he's saying.
the pressures on somebody in that fix.
But again, it goes back to him not having the right advisors, like, for example, advising on the kind of tax that you're advocating for that could work instead of the tariffs that he's creating. He doesn't have the people.
Exactly. And I was the first one to point that out. During the campaign, I said, he's going to get elected. Everybody said, oh, ha, ha, ha. I said, he's going to get elected because he's the only one addressing the concerns of the people.
Well, I got a couple more questions for you. We got 15 minutes left.
Let me finish. But I said he's not going to be able to do anything because he's a real estate developer, an entertainer. He knows nothing whatsoever about Washington. He doesn't know the issues. He doesn't know the people he can appoint who would support him and who's going to undermine him. And so he's not going to be able to form a government to back him on these things. And these things are the most difficult things because he's up against the most powerful lobbies who will fight to the death to protect their advantages.
Yeah.
And that's what I said, I wrote. And I've been proven completely correct on that.
No, there's no argument about that.
And don't say this in any defense of him or me. I'm just saying that if you are in that situation and all of this pressure is on you, I mean, what had Flynn done? Nothing. He did nothing.
Well,
you're supposed to meet with governments.
Well, there's a way and there are rules for doing it, and he violated them.
That's all made up, Rob. Look, I'm the one who was in the government.
I just said the other day that anybody can be arrested for anything with all the web of rules and laws that we have in this country. So I can't argue with that.
Okay. All right.
So we've only got a couple of minutes left. We've got about 13 minutes left, and I want to cover a couple of other topics that you've
11.
One is democratic socialism and Bernie Sanders. Do you have any take on him and that whole idea?
I think Bernie was just too weak. He was too weak. He was too intimidated by Hillary and the DNC. I think he should have stood up at the convention and demanded the nomination. He should have said, I won, they stole it from me. And then I think he would have become a very viable, strong leader for the Democrats. But instead, he submitted. And you just can't come back from that. So as much as you dislike Trump, Trump didn't submit. He hasn't submitted to the media attack or the FBI, CIA attack or Mueller's attack. But Bernie, he submitted. He gave up. So I think that was a mistake, and so I think that Bernie is out of it.
What about democratic socialism?
Well, who represents it? I mean, look, Rob, what are the Democrats today? They used to be the party of the working class. The Republicans were the party of the business interests. So there was balance in the system. Nobody could run away with it. The corporations, the capitalists were checked by the unions. The unions were represented by the Democrats. The capitalists were represented by the Republicans. There was balance in the system. It worked because there was give and take. There had to be compromise. Nobody could have the whole thing. Well, that's gone. Who are the Democrats? What are they? They're into identity politics. What is the working class? They're the Trump deplorables.
Yeah, everything's flipped.
So what I'm telling you is this is why the working class voted for Trump.
Yeah.
So the Democrats are failing. Now, I'm not saying this because I'm a Republican. I don't like either party. I don't trust either party. In fact, I distrust the parties more than you distrust Trump. So, but this is beside the point, what you and I trust or don't trust. The fact is, the Democrats have lost their way. This started, and I'm sure you would agree with this. What was that new liberal think tank that came in with the Clinton administration?
John Podesta, and I think it was after that. Yeah, are you talking about the Center for American Progress? Or are you talking about the Democratic Leadership Council?
I don't remember what it was. It was a new Democratic think tank that came in with Clinton, and what they did, they convinced the Democrats that they had to get money from business, just like.
I think that's the Democratic Leadership Council, the DLC, okay, which I think is now gone. It's been replaced by New Democrats or some other group like that. And Hillary was the goddess or the queen or the empress of the DLC.
And this was the beginning of their fortune. This was the beginning of the Clintons' fortune and the end of the Democratic Party, because they are now funded by the same interests that fund the Republicans.
You know, it's funny because, I was at a whistleblower conference Monday and Tuesday. I gave a talk there. And one of the keynote speakers was Linda Tripp, who was the whistleblower. She described herself as she blew the whistle on the most powerful man in the world. And, when she did.
Lewinsky dress.
Yes. And back when it happened, I was mad at her because, Clinton was a Democrat. I've since learned how bad Clinton was, and I actually realize now that what she did was really the right thing. And boy, she's been through a lot with that. And
did they imprison her?
They didn't imprison her, but as a we cover whistleblowers pretty heavy on this show and at Op-Ed News. I believe in whistleblowers are true heroes. We need them. We should be teaching children to be whistleblowers in elementary school. And what I've learned is when you become a whistleblower, you become a pariah. You are attacked. They attempt to destroy your life. I spoke to whistleblowers who ended up going from being a principal of a school, making six figures, to living in his car because he reported on problems. And that's what happens with whistleblowers. So they did that to her, and she had it pretty rough for a while.
Yeah. I remember they were talking about indicting her for recording the conversation with with Monica.
Yeah.
And they claimed that, this was illegal. You recorded the conversation. And they were threatening to indict her, and then it just disappeared from the news. So I never knew whether she got indicted and sent up or not. But yeah, okay.
Another whistleblower, Assange, Julian Assange. What's your take on him?
Well, actually, he's not a whistleblower. He's a journalist.
He basically reports on what whistleblowers release.
He publishes after he checks it out carefully.
Right.
They publish the information that comes to him from whistleblowers.
Right.
Now, that's what the New York Times used to do. For example, when Ellsberg gave him the Pentagon Papers. Of course, today they wouldn't dare publish anything like that.
Yeah, they'd ask for permission and they'd be told to wait a year or two, and that's what they've done. And that's their recent history.
That's right. So my view on Julian Assange is it shows the corruption of the United States and British governments.
And the media. I think you've written about what you think of the media in terms of how they handle him.
And the media. And what has happened with the former president of Ecuador declining the demand that he change the Constitution and run for a third term. They now have in there a guy that Washington has managed to bend to their will. This new president is very weak. He's purchasable. He's been purchased. And now he's talking about throwing Assange out of the embassy. And of course, the Brits will get him and hand him over to us. Well, of course, he's not an American citizen, so there's no way he can commit treason against the United States. You have to be a citizen of the country. But this won't stop the indictment from accusing him of that. It won't stop the indictment accusing him of being a spy because he publishes leaks that are given to him. He's not the one who stole the information.
Okay, so let's just move on. You wrote, "Democracy is fighting to survive the rise of Western authoritarianism." I'm very interested in authoritarianism. I think that is a part of what civilization brought us that is a problem. And I look at the world as before civilization, we were a very bottom-up human race, people, and that civilization brought us these top-down characteristics of hierarchy and centralization and authoritarianism, big time. And I think that most people, certainly most Americans, are authoritarian personalities, which means not that they are somebody who wants to dominate other people, but that they need to be dominated by authoritarian dominators.
Whether that's an inherent need or inculcated way of raising people is the question. But
I think it's inculcated. I think it's the culture that does it.
That's my view too. And so since we agree on that, I would say, yes, that's the case. And also I would say, Rob, that authoritarianism is heightened and given more fuel by too much diversity, because you get too many different interests, and these interests then conflict and get at each other's throats. And then there has to be more authoritarianism to maintain social peace or stability. So identity politics, which the Democratic Party has endorsed, will, I am absolutely totally convinced, greatly enhance authoritarianism. Because if everybody is a victim, they hate each other. And there's no unity. Wait a minute, let me finish. There's no unity in the population to stand against the government, because they're all at each other. The whites, the blacks, the men, the women, the straights, the homos. It's all. So where is the unity to stand as a people, as a working class, against the authoritarians? There's not any. The unity in the United States has been destroyed. And mass diverse immigration is part of it, and identity politics is part of it. And so this is the real problem that we face. And this is why I think increasingly government from Washington is going to be difficult. Increasingly, the government is going to be by the private interest, the most powerful private interest. And you're watching the complete breakup of government authority, because who rules? Trump or the military security complex? Trump, the deep state. Who's ruling? Trump, the global corporations. Trump, Wall Street. He can't dominate any of those. Now, this didn't used to be the case.
And both parties have handed the power over to them.
Exactly, because they're bought. Because that's who finances their campaigns and produces private fortunes for the Clintons.
Okay, we've got to wrap. We got any last minute things you want to say?
I did, but it's gone completely out of my head.
It's been fun. It's always fun.
But, you know, talking to you is always nice, because you're aware of a lot of things, and you're intelligent, and you're open-minded, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Rob. And I congratulate you again on your website and on the vast diversity of opinion. But I think you need to take to heart some of the things I've said and realize the problem is actually worse even than you think.
No, I think it's pretty bad. Thanks so much, Paul. This is the Rob Kall Bottom Up Show. And my guest for this show has been Paul Craig Roberts. Thank you.
You're welcome.